This morning starts a four-part series on the human condition. A series, of course, that could linger for a lifetime, but not to bore you, four seems like enough, and also enough for me. Anita and I share this sort of sarcastic, comic relief when facing the acute no cure from the coronavirus issue and the chronic conflict of our racial and political wars. The disinformation and all of the conspiracy theories, Anita and I will often shake our heads after watching the news and say together, the human condition. Sarcasm, it has been said, is the lowest form of humor. But desperate times call for desperate measures, which may have something to do with my wanting to preach on the human condition for the next 4 weeks. The human condition should keep our interest, for we are, other than God, the most mysterious creature on earth. And there are plenty of examples in the Bible and in life about the human condition, or what may often be referred to as human pet tricks. When I say human condition, what I'm really talking about, of course, is our human nature. What is our natural state of things, both the good and the bad? And this complicated question is loaded with controversy and should be treated carefully. But treat we must, for as people of faith, it holds enormous weight for us in determining who we are and what is our potential, and also whose we are. Apparently, since we became conscious hominoids some 250,000 or so years ago, we have asked this question: who are we? What separates us from all the other beasts of the field, the fish in the waters? What is our natural state of existence? What determines who and what we will become? And even being able to just ask this question is a clue of who we are, for we have been given a conscious ability to reflect, and out of that reflection, we have evolved to understand the power of language, words, which is why the words in the Bible are so vital to help us reflect on this question. And the older I get, really, the deeper sense I have of the wisdom of the Bible as it shares light upon this question: who are we? For 3,000 years, before biologists and psychologists and evolutionists and philosophers and neurologists, the ancient poetry of the Psalms and the creation stories tell us who we are. We heard already from the 8th Psalm, we are a little lower than God, and we are created in God's image. Hear it again as it is said in the first creation story in Genesis 1, verses 26 through 31. After creating for 5 days all that existed except for humanity, God says, let us make humankind in our image. It's the royal we, apparently, our image. And according to our likeness, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle. Same language as from Psalm 8, not coincidentally. Dominion over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And so God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, third time, he created them, male and female. He created them, and then God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and steward it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." And God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with the seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps upon the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given green plant for food." And it was so. It was so. And God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. In all the other 5 days of creation, God exclaimed, "It is good." But on this sixth day, the creation of humankind, God says, "It is very good." And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Yeah, so you know the human condition. So let me start with a story. On Friday, for reasons I will not bore you with, I had to trade in my old cell phone for a new one. And while masked up and socially distanced at the AT&T store downtown, I began asking the technician who was switching all the things over about the new technology known as 5G. Is it in Birmingham? He laughed and said, "Yeah, it's in Birmingham, and in some places they think that it's a conspiracy." The human condition. I thought, I'm going to dig deeper into this issue. So what's the story? A conspiracy of 5G. He said, yes, there's this conspiracy theory that 5G is what is causing COVID-19. While there are scientific objections to 5G technology, fear that it causes COVID is not one of them. Although the conspiracy theory that it does has fed such a global online tribe cult around it that several have tried to burn down 5G towers in Europe. You see, when it comes to the human condition, there's nothing like a good conspiracy theory to reveal something of who we are. Turns out our need to believe these outrageous conspiracies are part of what makes us human. And evolutional psychologists claim that when we are faced with uncertainty or unexplained and fearful phenomenon, it is part of our nature, our human nature, to make sense of things. It's called the intentionality bias, that there's some power or force or conspiracy that's intentionally making this happen. And this stems from our need to find patterns in random events. It's one of the ways we learned to survive. After my first wife, Nancy, died in a car accident, people would say the strangest things to me, trying to make sense of something that was really just random. The worst was when they blamed God. The sweet mother of one of our church members came up to me at a dinner some weeks later and said, "I am so sorry to hear about your wife's death." Nancy was an artist. She said, "You know, it must be that God needed an artist more in heaven than on earth." At which point I had to refrain myself from reaching out and strangling her there on the spot. But I did overreact and said to her, "Oh yeah? Why don't you sit down with my two daughters and try to explain that one to them?" Okay, as kids, we assume that everything around us has a reason. We haven't yet grasped the notion that things happen randomly by accident or coincidence. But then supposedly, as we grow and mature and develop, we learn that not everything happens by design, that stuff happens that we don't know the answers to, that leave for us the deepest unanswered questions and the mystery of life, and should instill in us a sense of reverence and awe and wonder for this incredibly mysterious creation that God has created, much like the psalmist who lifted up those amazing, powerful words, "O Lord, our sovereign," we're not, "our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth." I once sat in a Sunday school class on predestination. It was a Presbyterian class, of course. I was visiting the church. And the teacher tried to make the point that he knew absolutely that God had predestined every single thing to happen in this world just as it happened, even as far as deciding what tie he was going to put on this morning when he came to church. I got to tell you, this is the kind of stuff that gives Presbyterians a bad name. Yes, even after we grow up some, our natural instinct is still with us to find patterns when faced with uncertainty or threat. And we revert to this childlike natural tendency, this intuition to connect the dots. So we go on the internet with our 5G phone, and we learn that it's not really 5G that causes COVID, that actually COVID is a hoax perpetrated by Dr. Fauci, and the mandate to wear masks actually is a communist plot to scare us into sequestering so that our economy will shut down. Keep reading and you will discover that there's a whole lot of people who believe this. They're convinced of this, which is perfect, of course, because now not only do we have a reason for this unexplained phenomenon, but we also have a tribe, a culture, a relationship with other people who believe like we do, and instinctually and our human nature-wise, our deep need is to be in relationship. We're tribal people. That's how we learn to survive, by being connected. Lone wolves never last long, only by pack. There's scientific proof for this. In fact, there's a new scientific school of thought from some neuroscientists and biologists and evolutionists who believe that our nature, that is our DNA, predetermines way more about our lives than we can believe. It determines our choices. And they believe that something in us is hardwired or predestined to make the choices we make even before we're conscious of making those choices. And I got to tell you, for me, this only reduces us to little more than a robot-like artificial intelligence with no freedom and no agency and ultimately no responsibility. Okay, yes, we are motivated more by instinct, by our human nature than we think. And historically, those who have survived were those who were the most anxious and afraid. You didn't live long sitting around singing Kumbaya. You lived long by being afraid. You learned to work together in tribes and to be wary of strangers and to use violence and force to eat, to live, and to thrive. That's the human nature, instinctual part in each of us, and it is still with us now. It reflects in our lives now. But that's not the little lower than God part of us. That's the little higher than the beasts part of us. There's nothing romantic about our past. It was bloody and brutal and bestial. This is part of who we are. We learned to survive in a dog-eat-dog world. And while some sentimental romanticists believe that people are born sweet and innocent, and that we are taught to hate to have anger and to fear and to be selfish, scientists are learning, just like the Bible already knows, that these states are instinctual and natural for us. In fact, there may be no greater example of the human condition than the hubris of a bunch of academic researchers with a little bit of information from a few research projects behind them to make such a godlike claim that we are only the product of 1,000,000 years of genetic wheeling and dealing, that our DNA conspires to make us who we are. And while this may make even double predestination Presbyterians blush, for my money, it is the most hopeless thing I have ever heard. The psalmist, the writer of Hebrews and of Genesis, knew also instinctually something else. That what it means to be human, what it means to be saved, is to be saved from our natural bestial condition into becoming more godlike in the image of God with which we have been created. Take this morning's poetic account in Genesis, creating the world in 6 days, and on the sixth day bringing to culmination all of creation in us, this human being created according to the story in God's image of all things. And then with the same language in the 8th Psalm, the same wording gives us agency, responsibility. The word is dominion, but you can interpret that a number of ways. I've heard it interpreted as domination. I've had conversations with those who say, God has given us everything in this creation so that we may dominate it and use it up. But the Hebrew to me, which is nuanced, says dominion means steward, to care for it. We have the power and authority to care for it, and it is for us to use for sustenance and for joy. What are humans? What are humans? That God is mindful of us. For me, this is the ultimate question of faith in the heart of our most fundamental sense of who we are. This is what the psalmist is praising, that God created us as humans through evolution, if you like, a little lower than God's self in order that we may be in relationship with God and all of God's creation in this organic relationship, as God was in relationship with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Who are we that God has made us a little lower than the angels and crowned us with glory and honor? Who are we that God has given us charge over God's creation, giving us agency and responsibility to steward the care for all that God has given us, the birds and the fish and the fauna and the beast and other human beings, not to dominate, but the agency and responsibility to steward, just like God would. You see, the Bible understands that the answer to the question of the human condition cannot be understood apart from our relationship in God. This force that personally knows each of us has created each of us in God's image, male and female, and chooses to be in relationship with us, each of us, every single human one of us who was ever born and who ever shall be. How? Because we are born out of God's true God image. Yes, there are parts of us, our nature, our dark nature, or our nurture, our environment, or our experiences that may determine who and what we become. There are parts of us for that. Some scientists say that it might be 60% of who we are. But I think the greater influence is the God image in each of us that gives us freedom to choose, to grow, to become more than our natural, instinctual selves. Freedom and agency to be responsible and productive stewards, to contribute to the common good, to care for others besides ourselves, to grow up contributing to something better than what we have been born into, and to make a world better than it was before, with less fear and paranoia, hopefully, and to own up to our own brokenness and responsibility, to work toward reconciliation with those that we are estranged from, and to grow up more spiritually and emotionally. This is the point. This is who we are and why we are. And these are the most hopeful words in all of life to me in this Bible text. This is the good news that made in the image of God, no matter what the threat, no matter the conflict, no matter our condition or experience in life, we still have human agency and freedom to choose. And what we're called to choose is faith and hope and love. That in God, just as in Jesus Christ, everything is made new. And this divine freedom is ironically what makes us human. The mysterious part in us. And if we can steward that part in us, care for that part in us, be responsible for it, tend it, water it, nurture it, that part in us that was created just like a seed of an oak tree, with all of its planning in its seedness, that only needs to be nurtured to grow into its fulfillment. If we can nurture that part in each of us, starting with ourselves and then becoming more the image of God, caring for others, oh Lord, whew, how sovereign is your name in all the earth. Amen.